Yeah, guys. So, definition of stewardship, according to Google, is the job of supervising or taking care of something, such as an organization or property, right? And when God sees that you can manage this season well, He will usher you into your next season, right? And when you're talking about a level, according to Google, also a level is a position on a real or imaginary scale of amount, quantity, extent, or quality. So think about that as we're continuing to talk about work your level, the power of good stewardship. And going back, this story started back in Genesis 37, but today we're just looking at Genesis 39, Genesis chapter 39, 40, 41, and 42. Right, you guys? And going back to the title, guys, work your level, the power of good stewardship. God is not calling you to work their level or that level. He's not even calling you to work in old level or old time or old season, but He's calling you to work the level that He has for you. A lot of people, they are working in old seasons. They're in seasons in certain lanes that God didn't call them to be in. It could be that men wanted them to be in that area, or that's what they thought was best, or that's what they wanted, but that's not where God called them. And some people are on levels and lanes that God has given them. And God is saying that He's calling you not to work their level or that lane or that level, but He's calling you to work the level that He has for you. So that's what we're talking about today. Continuing to talk about work your level, the power of good stewardship. In this next point, God is calling you forward, not backward or behind, but forward. And He's calling you to walk in pace. He's calling you to walk in tune. He's calling you to walk in step with Him. So you got to realize that your season is changing. Your season doesn't change naturally when you see it change. Your season changes and shifts in the realm of the spirit first, as God has given us years back. It changes in the spirit first, and when you agree with God, then it's going to shift and turn and manifest in your physical world. So our main character today that we're looking at, and we're looking at him because we have a Genesis series and we have a Joseph series, but we're going to look at Joseph. And how he worked his level, and he was a good steward. And that's why we're going to revisit those chapters again in Genesis. And also we're going to revisit Ecclesiastes 3:1-8, because it talks about times and seasons in that scripture. So as we look at Joseph, you guys, you're going to realize, I know many of you are familiar with this story, but you're going to realize Joseph didn't complain. He didn't say, what's the point of being faithful and believe in God? Joseph was faithful with his level. Joseph, if you go back in Genesis 37, it starts there with him. His talk about his brothers and all that, and different things, and how his father favored him, and the coat of many colors, and the dreams and different things like that. And it kind of continues forward. But basically their jealousy and their hate for him, his brothers, not all of them, but most of them, not like Benjamin or nothing like that, but his older brothers, they hated him, they despised him, they were jealous of him, and God had already showed him what was going to happen in his future, and also in their future before it even happened. But it came in seed form, in the form of a dream, right, and dealing with natural elements, but it was spiritual, and it was symbolic with what was going to come years down the line. God didn't say when He gave Joseph those dreams, well, you're going to go through some things before you get there. You're going to go through some betrayal. Your same family, that you don't see nothing wrong with sharing these dreams, they're going to throw you into a pit. They're going to throw you into a pit. You're going to be sold into a foreign land. You're going to be sold as a slave. You're going to go to Potiphar's house. And when you get in that house, I'm going to favor you and I'm going to bless you. But his wife is going to try to sleep with you lots of times. She's going to try you, and you're not going to, submit to her advances. And she's going to lie on you and say that you tried to rape her, say that you did. And you're going to be thrown into prison. Joseph, you didn't deserve the pit. You didn't deserve Potiphar's house. You didn't deserve the prison, but eventually all of that is going to usher you to the palace. And I'm not just taking you to the palace, Joseph, just so you can say, oh, I'm in a palace. I'm giving you the position of being in a palace and government to save the lives of many. All of this is working out according to God's will, so that pit equaled Potiphar's house, and that Potiphar's house equaled the prison. With the dream interpretation, after Potiphar's house, he ended up in prison because he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, right? And in the prison, he was interpreting those dreams. And everywhere he was, God was with him. The Spirit of God was with him. He had an excellent spirit. He was favored, and that ushered him into the palace. So again, we're talking about work your level. What is the level that God has given you to work? Not the level someone else wants you to work. Not the level you were working in your old season. Because even if you are still in a certain season, God gives you new measures of grace and glory and strength. So it'll always be like the Bible says, you go from faith to faith, level to level, and glory to glory. So I'm repeating this again for someone. God is not calling you to work their level or that level. He is calling you to work the level that he has for you. And that's why I gave you guys that definition of level and stewardship in the beginning, right? He's calling you forward. He's not calling you backward or behind, but he's calling you forward and to walk in pace, in tune, and step with him, almost in like a sync with him, So you got to realize that your season is changing, right? And God said to encourage you, don't give up. So you guys can check out some decrees that I'm going to leave below for the YouTube channel. But encourage you guys not to give up. In this third point, what you do now equals your next. You guys remember God gave that to us back in like 2018, 2019, early, I believe. Whatever you do now, and we have videos talking about this, whatever you do now on this level equals what you're going to get on your next level. Right, you guys? It equals what you're going to get on your next level. So it's important, guys, not to despise, it's important not to despise what you're doing on this level, what God is calling you to on this level, because whatever you do now is going to equal your next. Again, Joseph didn't complain. It didn't mean he didn't have a right to. It didn't mean he didn't have feelings and emotions, but he didn't complain. He didn't say, what's the point of being faithful and believing God? Look at my situation. That's why it's so important not to allow your situation or circumstance to dictate your prayer life or your fasting or your kingdom advancement or you being faithful to do what God has given you to do. He didn't say, what's the point of having faith? What's the point of having character and integrity? He wasn't in a prison and was like, well, why don't I just blend in like those around me? Because he had leadership. Even though he was a servant, he had great qualities of leadership, and God was building him up. God was building up his character. He was maturing him, through the unfairness, and God blessed him richly. He didn't go through that in vain. So you can't say, oh, what's the point of this when I'm not seeing the results? This is a word for someone, when I'm not seeing the results as quickly as I would like. Why don't I just blend in like those around me and do what they do, act how they act? No, God is calling you to be set apart and to be different. So you can't allow whoever there is, their time or their level to stop you from your level in time. Let's say they're getting ready to graduate, but you still got some more courses before your graduation. Celebrate for them, but realize that your graduation is coming, because guess what? It's somebody that haven't even applied yet to do what you're doing, but you're more than halfway there and you're going to graduate soon. So you never know who you're inspiring. You never know, like your testimony is not all about you. We go through certain tests to build to our testimony to help bless us and touch our lives, but the lives of others. Because look at how many people test, and them being triumphant in their test help them to build to their testimony and touch and bless your life. So this is why, guys, it's important to shine right where you are and to shine bright where you are, and God will increase that light. If you're not meant to be in a certain time and season, then you're not meant to be in that time or season, so there may be certain things that you need to do. But if it's a God move and it's a God thing, then the God that guided you there will continue to guide you there and move you beyond that. He'll move you beyond that, So, the betrayal and the hate, the jealousy of his brothers equaled his pit again. Then from the pit, he was sold to Potiphar, and it was in Potiphar's house. Then the prison and the palace. And I'm telling you all of these things because as we go back and read the story of Joseph, I want you guys to think about these things. So that's why we setting foundation. So the right perspective matters. What you do on this level that you're on in this season, in this time that you're in right now, your life, your spiritual and natural seasons of your life, it equals what you'll get or not get on your next level. God gave us that back some years ago also. So it's almost like what you deposit and the seeds you put in and the things you do now on this level, it's going to equal what you can withdraw and receive in your harvest on your next level. So before we get into the Genesis, I want to read Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 through 8. If you guys want to go with me there in your Bibles, you can. Or if you just want to listen, that's fine. Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 through 8 is talking about a time for everything. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. So there's a time for everything. It's a time and season for everything. And let's close with this Genesis reading, you guys. So you guys can go with me to Genesis chapter 39. Like I said, it starts in 37 with Joseph's dreams. But we're going to look at, now we're going to go to Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, and keep in mind he is not Egyptian, so he don't know how to speak this. This is a foreign place. This is a foreign land for him. You know, and some of you have been in foreign places and foreign lands, like in your spiritual season. But God used that season to help promote you and bless you and teach you things you didn't know before you got into that season. It didn't mean it was always comfortable or convenient, you know, but God was working it for you. Excuse me, guys, it's early. I need to drink some tea, so my voice with the air conditioner. But Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, which means this man have governmental rank, right? Because Pharaoh was the king, right? The captain of the guard. So Potiphar is an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials. The captain of the guard brought him from the Ishmaelites, and we know the difference between the Israelites and the Ishmaelites, even like to this day. But from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Okay, the Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, so God favored him, God protected him, God was with him. God, you know, because he had a spirit of excellence, you know, God was with him. He gave him success in everything he did. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. You know, and God will test you. The enemy will send things also, but it can't be, it's not going to go over God's head. It's not like he's in control. Only God is in control. You know, so there are times and seasons in life where you will be tested with your level. You will be tested with your stewardship. You will be tested to see, okay, am I going to serve God and continue forward, or am I going to give in to the temptation and say, no, God, I turn my back on you, or you ain't moving fast enough for me, or why am I in this situation and I lose my faith? No, you got to choose to be like Joseph and persevere and know that I'm going to work my level. It's power in my good stewardship for my next harvest and my next season. And this is not happening in vain, because this is strengthening my intimacy with the Lord. This is like what many of you probably be saying. This is strengthening my intimacy with the Lord and what God has called me to on this level into on my next level, for his glory. Somebody say all for his glory, right? So Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. You know, Joseph, look at Joseph physically in this position, but spiritually and physically, the hand of the Lord is on him. And this man's house is favored because of Joseph. And there are some people that you be connected to, they favored because of you. It's not saying God don't love them and ain't blessing them, but you know and they know the hand of God is blessing and working in their life because you being connected to them. It's not saying, oh, only you is the blessing, but there's biblical. People can be connected to people and be favored because they're connected to them. We looked at this in prior videos and in our Genesis series when we talked about Abraham with Lot. Lot wasn't favored because Lot was favored by himself. Lot was favored because he was connected to Abram. Potiphar is favored because he's connected to Joseph. The Bible talks about that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So there's different places in scriptures and Bible verses and studies where we've talked about favor and the importance of favor and the blessing of favor, right? So the blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Now we didn't talk about her and her spirit. We didn't got in depth with this, so we just gonna keep reading because we did videos, like I said, about it before. I don't mean to be repetitive, but that's why some notes I'm not gonna go back and overdo because it's already uploaded. So she was persistent in this. This wasn't something for a short amount of time. This devil in her was using this lady, the spirit of lust and temptation, to try to trap Joseph. And how many of you know that when you're going through and you're like, okay, God, I don't understand this, but I'm trusting you. I'm going to continue to work my level. I'm going to continue to be good stewardship. I'm going to continue to be faithful, God, even though it may hurt sometimes, even though I may not understand. There are going to be tests and trials and temptations that come your way, because it's trying to get you, even though prison is next, but it's a palace after that prison. That prison is not in vain. That prison was just a stepping stone. It's going to try to divert you and detour you and derail you from the real destiny that God has for your life, from your next level. Because let's say he would have slept with her. That would have landed him in jail for real, or killed. And then what about the lives and purpose and destiny that God had for him in the lives of others? Okay, so but he refused her. He said, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. You know, with greater stewardship comes greater responsibility, comes greater level of maturity, comes greater penalty also and punishment. It comes greater rewards, but also greater punishment. You guys ever heard of the higher you are, the harder you will fall? Right? The harder you are, the harder you will fall. And I've seen that working in the corporate world, because you guys know I've worked many jobs in the past before God called me off that into the season that I've been in the last 3+ years or so. I've seen that, where I've seen certain companies and organizations, they be so high and then they fall in the company. It does something to the company. And I've also seen it where they're doing good being in their high position, and it blessed the company and the people in the company. But you can be anyone in any position, and your wickedness will be found out. Your righteousness will be found out. That's why if you fall high from a high place, that's going to hurt you. But if you keep building in the high place and you keep building, that's going to bless you because you're increasing. So he said, my master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of his household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And this goes back also to Proverbs. We talked about Proverbs with the adulterous woman, how she leads many people to the grave, right? She basically, paraphrasing, their souls and their lives and their destiny. She captures, she locked, and it goes to the grave, right? This could be spiritual or physical. And talking about adultery and stuff like that. And how many people, I'm sure Joseph won her first rodeo. I'm sure she done did this to many people before, but he had character, he had integrity, right? And you got to have character and integrity also. So she, it ran out of the house. He left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When he heard me scream for help, she kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. And I'm sure he knew deep down, because Joseph, but he probably was blinded by that deceptive spirit, and then they married, so their spirits is intertwined pretty much. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. So the man was, he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So do you see the connection? Potiphar is an official of Pharaoh's house. This prison that he's going to is not just a regular prison. This is a prison where the king's prisoners were confined. So people that was connected or tied or had some type of relation to the king. So if you look at it, God's kingdom, thank you, Lord. If you look at it, God's kingdom spiritually is working, and the governmental kingdom physically for Joseph is working in his favor, but it just don't look like it, but it is. It's all part of the puzzle, when you're putting together a puzzle piece. Some people get frustrated because, like, I've been working on this puzzle for so long. I thought this part went with this, and this don't even go over here. But if you keep building and working that puzzle, it's all going to come together. And the great thing that I love about God is he don't leave you to try to work the puzzle pieces on your own. He already have the puzzle pieces in place. You just got to trust him and to build. Okay, so, right. So Joseph is in his prison. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible. So the warden is like the overseer. He's the one in charge. He's the overseer. He's the eyes and ears. He's making sure everything is like copacetic, right? So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. This is tying back to working your level, stewardship, the power of good stewardship. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And that's what so many people don't realize about you. They're looking at your natural circumstance and situation. They don't see what you were before, but they really don't see that you are more blessed spiritually than you are physically. And that's physically, this is a word for somebody, that physically your situation is going to turn around, and that God's favor and hand and success is on your life. It really is. And so let's talk about the cupbearer and the baker. But just because they don't see it, or they do see it and they don't recognize it, doesn't mean God's hand is not on your life. Okay? So the cupbearer and the baker. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and his chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. Do you guys see the connection? The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of his own. Excuse me. Now, before we get into this dream, in Proverbs it talks about, do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before like obscure men. He will stand before a king who is an important person, has important rule and rank and authority, right? And Joseph's dreams is making room for him. and it's going to make room for him. And that's a word for someone. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Your gifts and dreams and talents from God is going to make room for you. But it's going to place you before people of influence and importance. You a person of influence and importance also, but it's another level. You understand what I mean? To get you into another realm and spirit. And that's why God has been having you perfect and work your craft and work your giftings and honor him in the secret place. Honor him before little, honor him before much, honor him when it's just you and him, because it's preparing you for what he has ahead for you. Okay, so going back, they had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of his own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected, which means like they were cast down. Their faces looked sad. They wasn't happy, right? So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Now, he could have just, saw that their faces was sad or said, I hope y'all feel better, or what's wrong. Or he could have been like, to be honest, I really don't care what's wrong with y'all right now. I'm going through my own thing, so, we all going through. But he didn't have that mentality, something within him, which was God, led him to say that to them, led him to take notice of that. Because I'm sure they weren't the only one in the prison that's looking sad. I'm sure there were others, right? But he asked them, who was in custody with him, his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, and we see throughout the Bible, look in the book of Daniel, look in Genesis, look in different places of the Bible, how God will give his servants the interpretation of the dream, right? So we both had dreams, they answered, but there's no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." See how he still include the Lord and acknowledge him and give him the glory? And many of you have suffered and went through a lot of unjust things and different things in life where you're like, "God, why did I have to go through this? Like, why me? Like, what did I do so bad to deserve it?" But you don't even realize that, like Job, it's not that you really did anything bad to deserve it. It's God say, "Have you considered my faithful servant?" Because he know you're going to pass the test, and he know you're going to get more coming out than what you had going in. And this level will not be wasted. Okay, so he said, "Tell me your dream." So the chief cupbearer, which means the cupbearer to the king, the chief one. If you're chief over something, that means you're the highest rank over the other ones. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. Because remember, Joseph is a dreamer. This is what happened going back to Genesis 37. So he said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes." This is why it's so important, guys, for us to pay attention to our visions and our dreams, what God is saying, and to look at the physical and spiritual meaning, right? So it said, on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. And thank you, Holy Spirit. That's a word for somebody. Even though you've been pressed and you've been squeezed, it's producing fruit. It's producing good, godly fruit. Okay. So this is what it means. Joseph said to him, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position." I want somebody to highlight Genesis 40 verse 13, because I assure you that's a word for somebody listening to this, because that's what God is doing. And it could be a literal 3 days, or it can be a spiritual season of 3 days. But basically the message is you will be restored to your position. You're going to be restored to your rightful place. But this lesson that you learn from this season is going to yield an advantage to you. So the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Listen, 14. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. And we see as we continue to read that he didn't, because it wasn't the set time. He remembered him in set time and season. Somebody say set time and season. Okay, get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. or 3 wicker baskets. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree. He's going to impale him on a pole. You're going to die, pretty much. And the birds will eat away your flesh. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged, or he impaled, and that's a very painful process, the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Verse 23, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. But even when, as we close and get into part 2 in the next video, even when people forget you, God don't forget you. And God is going to cause, as we continue to read, that same cupbearer to remember. But it was a set time and season, because it would have been out of time and season if Joseph had been remembered in this time and season, because the famine was 7 years and the time for plenty of grain was 7 years, right? And it wasn't the time it would have taken away. So that's why it talks getting back into set time and season. So guys, join me for part 2 as we continue on.